under the blinding lights of professional basketball, where every whistle can change a destiny and every call can rewrite a legacy, a single voice has shattered the calm. A whistleblower, someone who once stood on the very hardwood where dreams are made, has now pulled back the curtain on what could be the WNBA's most explosive scandal yet. The revelation doesn't just threaten the credibility of one league, it threatens to erode the very foundation of trust in sports. And at the center of this unfolding storm stands Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, a figure once praised for modernizing the league, now accused of presiding over its potential undoing. It all began quietly, almost innocently, with a post that seemed destined to disappear into the noise of online chatter. But this one didn't. The author was no random fan or anonymous critic. He was a former NBA referee, a man who knew the system, the pressure, and the subtle ways influence creeps into the game. His words carried the weight of experience and the edge of confession. He claimed that what fans had been witnessing for months wasn't coincidence or bad luck. It was orchestration. The outcomes of WNBA games, he said, were not always decided by players' skills or coaches' strategies, but by invisible hands, directives and influences that came from higher up. He spoke cautiously but deliberately, hinting at pressures from league officials, directives to shape narratives, and even instructions to protect certain stars. It wasn't about fixing games outright, he explained. It was about balance, manufacturing drama, ensuring close finishes, and keeping ratings high. To fans who had long suspected that Caitlin Clark's controversial treatment and A'ja Wilson's royal officiating weren't just human error, his story was the missing puzzle piece. The narrative that once seemed like conspiracy now began to feel like truth. The more the whistleblower talked, the darker the picture became. He described a system where referees were quietly guided to manage outcomes, where certain players were targeted for tighter calls, and where others were shielded for the sake of marketing. The goal wasn't competition, it was control. According to him, those who failed to comply weren't reprimanded openly but found themselves quietly sidelined, passed over for playoff assignments or major televised games. The referee corps, he implied, had become a tool of image maintenance rather than impartial judgment. The words carried echoes of an older scandal, the NBA's own Tim Donaghy controversy, where insider betting and game manipulation nearly tore the league apart. This whistleblower even referenced it himself, warning that history has a way of repeating when greed and arrogance intertwine. He described how those entangled with gambling networks or pressured by executives often believed they were untouchable, until the system collapsed around them. In his voice, there was both bitterness and inevitability, as if this exposure was less about revenge and more about redemption. As his interview gained traction, fans began revisiting old footage with fresh eyes. Plays once dismissed as referee blunders now looked deliberate. Calls that swung the momentum of entire games seemed too conveniently timed to be mistakes. Social media erupted with slow-motion breakdowns and statistical analyses showing striking patterns. In nationally televised games, particularly those featuring marquee players, the rate of questionable officiating spiked noticeably. Teams in smaller markets, or those without high-profile stars, consistently found themselves on the losing end of controversial calls. Then came the alleged internal leaks. Screenshots of supposed league emails began circulating online. Though unverified, they hinted at internal directives to maintain competitive balance and maximize engagement through narrative continuity. The language was sterile, corporate, and hauntingly familiar to anyone who'd ever worked in entertainment. The implication was clear: if the storyline stayed alive, so did the money. Ratings meant revenue, and revenue meant power. And if that required bending the fairness of the game, so be it. While fans clamored for clarity, Engelbert remained silent. The commissioner, who had once been the public face of the WNBA's growth and empowerment movement, now seemed to vanish behind press releases and legal counsel. The league's official statement denied all wrongdoing, calling the claims baseless and defamatory. But the tone, formal, distant, and defensive, did little to calm the storm. For a league built on authenticity and empowerment, the robotic corporate response only deepened mistrust. It wasn't just fans who noticed. Players began posting cryptic messages on social media. Phrases like, "You can feel it when it's not our night," and "some things you can't control." Others liked or reshared posts questioning referee integrity. Behind closed doors, locker room conversations reportedly turned tense. Some veterans admitted that they had long felt manipulated by officiating trends. Others confessed that there were games where they knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. When the league wants a rivalry to stay alive, one anonymous player told a reporter, the whistle changes. By now, the whispers had grown into roars. Independent analysts compiled data showing statistical disparities between star-driven franchises and lesser-known teams. Investigative journalists began following the money, tracing sponsorship deals and broadcast incentives that seemed to align with the teams receiving the most favorable treatment. And threading through all of it was Engelbert's leadership. Her corporate background, her relentless focus on brand growth, and her push for expanded gambling partnerships. The gambling angle added a sinister new layer to the story. The WNBA, like many leagues, had recently embraced betting as a source of revenue and fan engagement. But as one former NBA official warned, once gambling money enters a league, it never leaves clean. Betting companies profited from unpredictability, and nothing generated unpredictability like a perfectly timed foul or a last-minute scoring swing. Fans began noticing how betting lines on certain WNBA games were eerily accurate, even when outcomes hinged on the most subjective calls. Someone, it seemed, always knew how the story would end. Reporters started uncovering patterns between referee promotions and league marketing initiatives. The same officials who oversaw controversial games involving top stars were often rewarded with postseason assignments. Meanwhile, lesser-known referees who made calls against marquee players quietly disappeared from high-profile matchups. It was the perfect ecosystem, one that rewarded compliance and punished conscience. Still, Engelbert said nothing. Her silence stretched into weeks, then months. When she finally appeared before reporters, her tone was calm but cold. She denied everything, dismissed the leaks as misinformation, and promised an internal review of officiating practices. But the damage was already done. Her words felt rehearsed, devoid of empathy, as if she were reading a statement to investors rather than addressing the disillusioned fans and players who made the league possible. The press conference that was meant to restore confidence only deepened the divide. By that point, even sponsors had begun to waver. Corporate partners reportedly initiated private audits, fearful of being tied to a rigged competition. Players' unions demanded third-party investigations. Congressional voices began to rise, calling for federal oversight if the league refused to come clean. The WNBA's once inspirational narrative of empowerment, progress, and breaking barriers was rapidly unraveling into a cautionary tale of corruption and control. Then came the interview that detonated everything. The whistleblower returned, this time with specifics. He named games, officials, and even referenced internal meetings where executive influence dictated officiating outcomes. He described headset communications between courtside supervisors and on-court refs, allegedly directing them to keep it close or let it play out, depending on how the broadcast was performing. He even produced a document, supposedly an internal memo, discussing narrative-driven engagement strategies. Whether it was real or fabricated hardly mattered anymore. The damage was irreparable. Fans had heard enough. Hashtags like #RiggedLeague and #WNBA Exposed exploded across every platform. Former players began speaking out, not necessarily confirming the whistleblower's claims but demanding transparency. "We deserve to know," one wrote. "If our sweat and effort were being used to script entertainment instead of sport, then we were never competing. We were performing." The public outrage forced Engelbert into yet another press appearance, one that would define her tenure. Standing before a sea of cameras, she denied the allegations once more, insisting the WNBA's integrity was beyond reproach. But when pressed for details about referee assignments, gambling relationships, and internal communications, she dodged. Her silence on specifics was deafening. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Sponsorship negotiations were paused. TV analysts dissected the scandal nightly. Even the NBA, the WNBA's parent organization, reportedly began discussing intervention to preserve the league's image. What began as a whisper of referee bias had morphed into a full-blown existential crisis. The future of women's basketball, the movement so many had fought to build, was hanging by a thread woven from mistrust and manipulation. Inside league offices, fear replaced pride. Employees deleted emails, postponed meetings, and avoided reporters. The atmosphere, insiders claimed, was one of paranoia and panic. Some staffers even contacted lawyers, unsure whether they might become scapegoats in whatever came next. The illusion of unity had shattered. The league that once championed sisterhood and equality now seemed trapped in a web of deceit. And yet, amidst the chaos, one thing became impossible to ignore. The courage of a single voice had forced an entire institution to confront its reflection. The whistleblower's confession, whether fully true or not, had exposed the fragility of trust in modern sports. It showed that even leagues built on empowerment are not immune to corruption. It revealed that integrity, once compromised, is the hardest currency to regain. The WNBA now stands at a crossroads. The question is no longer whether manipulation occurred, it's whether the league will acknowledge its own rot and rebuild from it. Engelbert's leadership may not survive the storm. The sponsors may walk. The fans may never fully return. But one truth remains unshakable. Without transparency, there can be no redemption. Because when the whistles stop meaning fairness, when the outcomes start feeling scripted, and when leadership hides behind silence, the game itself dies, no matter how bright the lights still shine. So as the echoes of this scandal continue to reverberate, the basketball world waits for the next move. Will the WNBA finally clean house, confront its demons, and restore the purity of the game? Or will it crumble beneath the weight of its own silence? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds its way back to the surface. And when it does, the sound of that whistle can shake an empire.